After 30, playing clean begins to cost a man more than he realizes. What once appeared honorable slowly becomes a quiet form of surrender, and the world, which rewards outcomes rather than intentions, begins to move past him without apology. He watches others rise, men no more intelligent than himself, men sometimes less disciplined, yet they advance with unsettling speed. The difference is rarely effort. The difference is that they have stopped playing a game designed to keep them harmless. In youth, a man is taught that fairness is the path to respect, that patience will be rewarded, that if he works hard and treats others well, doors will open. These ideas feel noble, even comforting, but they are designed for stability, not ascent. Stability benefits those already in power. Order protects the established, and so the young man obeys rules that older, more experienced players quietly rewrite among themselves. By the time he begins to see this, years have passed, and the realization arrives with a bitterness that feels almost like betrayal. Machiavelli understood this pattern centuries ago. Observing courts where polite men starved while decisive men governed kingdoms, he saw clearly that morality, as most people practice it, is often less about virtue and more about compliance. The man who insists on fairness in an unfair arena does not purify the arena. He simply disarms himself. And the crowd which praises his integrity will not share its power with him. Praise is cheap. Status is not given to the agreeable. It is taken by the strategic. The shift that occurs after 30 is subtle but irreversible. A man begins to understand that influence is not granted to those who appear good, but to those who are perceived as formidable. Formidable does not mean reckless, and it does not mean cruel for the sake of cruelty. It means calculated. It means controlled. It means understanding precisely when to speak, when to remain silent, when to concede, and when to press an advantage without hesitation. Strategic ruthlessness is not chaos. It is discipline sharpened into a weapon. Consider the difference between reckless aggression and strategic ruthlessness. The reckless man lashes out, driven by impulse, leaving damage that returns to destroy him. The strategic man moves with precision. He selects his battles carefully, strikes only when the outcome is nearly certain, and leaves as little trace as possible. One burns bridges in anger, the other builds bridges he intends to cross only once, extracting value before quietly moving on. To an observer, both may appear ruthless. In truth, only one survives. There is an art to appearing clean while making calculated moves. The powerful rarely announce their intentions. They cultivate reputations of reason, patience, and even generosity. Yet behind this image, they negotiate relentlessly, protect their interests without apology, and ensure that every alliance serves a purpose. Loyalty in its pure emotional form is fragile currency. Mutual benefit, however, endures. The alliance built on sentiment dissolves the moment feelings change. The alliance built on advantage remains stable because both sides know precisely what they stand to lose. Fairness, as most men understand it, is a comforting illusion. The world is governed not by fairness but by leverage. Leverage decides who speaks and who listens, who waits and who commands, who struggles and who accumulates. The man who refuses to see this remains trapped in a defensive posture, reacting rather than acting, hoping rather than shaping. And hope in the arena of power is a poor strategy. Imagine a general studying a battlefield at dawn. The mist is thick, the terrain uneven, the enemy unseen but present. The naive commander charges forward, trusting in courage alone, believing the purity of his cause will carry the day. The seasoned commander waits. He studies the wind, the ground, the rhythm of movement in the distance. He sends scouts, gathers fragments of information, and strikes only when the terrain itself becomes his ally. Both men are brave. Only one is dangerous. Status is earned not through virtue signaling, but through visible competence and invisible calculation. Men rise when others believe they control outcomes, when their presence alters decisions in a room, when their silence carries weight greater than another man's speech. This kind of authority is never accidental. It is built through observation, through restraint, through understanding the fears and desires that move people beneath the surface of their words. Emotional attachment to always doing the right thing as defined by others quietly destroys advancement. Not because ethics are useless, but because ethics without strategy become chains. There is a difference between being ethical and being exploitable. The ethical man chooses his principles deliberately and defends them with strength. The exploitable man follows every rule without question, even when those rules serve only to weaken him. After 30, the game reveals itself to those willing to see. The rules that once felt absolute begin to look negotiable. The boundaries that once seemed permanent reveal small openings, gray zones where outcomes are shaped by those bold enough to act. Most men hesitate at this threshold, afraid of what they might become if they step beyond the comfortable illusion of innocence. Yet the truth is simple. Power does not belong to the most innocent. It belongs to the most aware. And so the man who rises learns to move differently. He listens more than he speaks. He studies more than he reacts. He understands that appearing calm while others panic is itself a form of dominance. He learns that reputation is a shield, timing is a blade, and patience is often the most ruthless weapon of all, like a storm gathering beyond the horizon. His presence is felt long before it is seen, and when he finally moves, the outcome feels inevitable, as if events themselves had conspired in his favor. What most men fail to understand is that the world does not punish weakness immediately. It tolerates it, even rewards it for a time. And this delay is what makes the trap so effective. A man who plays clean after 30 may still receive compliments, still be seen as respectable, still believe he is progressing. Yet beneath the surface, the machinery of advancement moves around him, not with him. He becomes useful, dependable, predictable, and in the language of power, predictable means controllable. The first realization that separates those who rise from those who remain stagnant is simple but unsettling. Influence is rarely granted to the most deserving. It is granted to the most useful, to those who already possess influence. This is why alliances built on mutual benefit endure, while relationships built purely on loyalty dissolve under pressure. Loyalty asks for sacrifice. Benefit rewards cooperation. And men, regardless of what they claim, move according to incentives more reliably than they move according to sentiment. Machiavelli observed that princes who relied on affection alone were often abandoned at the first sign of danger, while those who ensured their allies profited from their success found loyalty that appeared unbreakable. The lesson was never that affection is worthless, but that affection without advantage is fragile. When a man builds networks, partnerships, and alliances after 30, he must begin to ask not who likes him, but who needs him, and whose success becomes stronger when tied to his own. There is a quiet psychological shift that must occur at this stage of life, and it is the shift from defense to offense. In youth, a man is taught to avoid mistakes, to protect his reputation, to minimize risk. This mindset produces careful workers and obedient citizens, but it rarely produces leaders. The man who rises begins to think differently. He no longer asks how to avoid losing. He asks how to win decisively. He understands that risk cannot be eliminated, only managed, and that hesitation often carries a greater cost than action. Yet strategic ruthlessness requires control, because the line between calculated moves and visible corruption is thin. The powerful understand how to operate in gray areas without drawing attention, how to pursue advantage without appearing predatory, how to enforce boundaries without displaying hostility. Reputation becomes armor, perception becomes a weapon, and the most effective moves are often those that appear to the outside observer completely ordinary. Consider a negotiation conducted in a quiet room. Two men sit across from each other. One speaks constantly, explaining, justifying, persuading, revealing his intentions in an effort to appear honest. The other listens, asking only a few precise questions, revealing nothing of his own position. When the agreement is finally reached, The first man feels relieved, even satisfied. Only later does he realize that every concession moved in one direction, every detail subtly shaped by the silence of the man across from him. Silence, when used correctly, is not emptiness, it is pressure. Many men remain trapped because they confuse morality with passivity. They believe that to be ethical is to yield, to accommodate, to avoid conflict at all costs. But ethics and passivity are not the same. The ethical man defends his interests without cruelty. The passive man abandons his interests to avoid discomfort. One earns respect, the other invites exploitation, and the world, which respects strength, even when it dislikes it, quickly learns which kind of man it is dealing with. After 30, time itself becomes a strategic factor. Opportunities that once seemed endless begin to narrow. Energy must be directed with precision. Distractions that once felt harmless reveal their cost. The man who rises becomes selective with his attention, ruthless with his schedule, and deliberate with his associations. He begins to see that every hour invested in trivial pursuits is an hour transferred to a rival who is planning, building, or positioning himself for advantage. There is also the matter of perception, which governs status more powerfully than reality. Men do not respond to what is true. They respond to what appears true. The one who understands this does not waste time insisting on recognition. He shapes perception quietly, allowing results to speak in ways words cannot. He allows others to underestimate him when it serves his purposes. And he allows his reputation to grow in controlled, deliberate increments, like a fire that spreads beneath the surface before it becomes visible. Imagine a wolf moving through a forest at night. It does not announce its presence. It does not rush without reason. It studies the movement of the herd, the direction of the wind, the moment when attention falters. When it finally moves, the outcome appears sudden, but the preparation was patient, methodical, invisible. Strategic men operate in much the same way. They observe longer than others think necessary. They prepare longer than others are willing to endure. And when they act, the result appears effortless, even inevitable. This is why fairness, as commonly understood, becomes a trap. The man who insists on playing by rules that others quietly bend places himself at a permanent disadvantage. He mistakes compliance for virtue, and in doing so he becomes a tool in systems designed by men far less restrained. The one who rises does not abandon principles entirely, but he chooses them carefully, understanding which rules preserve order and which exist merely to keep him obedient. And so the transformation continues. The man who once sought approval begins to seek leverage. The man who once feared being disliked begins to understand that respect and affection rarely travel together. The man who once waited for permission begins to move without asking. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he becomes someone others watch carefully, someone whose decisions carry weight, someone whose silence feels deliberate rather than uncertain. At a certain point, the man who studies power begins to notice something unsettling. The individuals who dominate rooms, control negotiations, and accumulate wealth rarely appear obsessed with morality in the way ordinary men are. They do not spend their energy proving they are good. They spend their energy ensuring they are effective. This difference, subtle at first, becomes enormous over time because effectiveness compounds while moral posturing merely exhausts. The transition from moral idealism to strategic pragmatism is not a sudden transformation but a gradual shedding of illusions. A man begins to see that the world is structured less like a courtroom and more like a marketplace. In a courtroom, truth and justice are supposed to prevail. In a marketplace, outcomes belong to those who understand leverage, timing, and negotiation. The man who treats every situation as a moral test finds himself constantly disappointed. The man who studies incentives begins to predict outcomes with unsettling accuracy. Machiavelli wrote that a ruler must learn how not to be good. And this statement has been misunderstood for centuries. It does not mean embracing cruelty or abandoning all principles. It means recognizing that rigid goodness applied blindly becomes weakness. The leader who refuses to deceive even when deception would prevent catastrophe condemns himself and those who depend on him. The commander who refuses to strike preemptively even when danger is certain sacrifices victory to preserve the comfort of his conscience. History remembers results, not intentions. Strategic ruthlessness, when understood properly, is not loud or theatrical. It is quiet, controlled, and often invisible. The strategically ruthless man rarely raises his voice. He rarely threatens. He simply shapes situations so that outcomes favor him, and he does so with such calm precision that others often do not realize what has happened until the result is irreversible. This is why recklessness is the enemy of power. Recklessness draws attention, strategy avoids it. There is a psychological barrier that prevents many men from adopting this mindset. They fear becoming something monstrous, something cold, something detached from humanity. Yet the truth is that calculated action does not erase humanity, it refines it. The surgeon who cuts to save a life is not cruel because he uses a blade. The general who maneuvers troops to end a war quickly is not heartless because he understands violence. Precision is not brutality. Precision is control. Observe the difference between the man who reacts emotionally and the man who responds strategically. The emotional man is predictable. His anger, his fear, his enthusiasm all appear exactly when expected. Others learn to anticipate his reactions and manipulate them. The strategic man, however, is difficult to read. His calm remains constant whether he is winning or losing. His expressions reveal little. His intentions remain concealed until action is already underway. Unreadable men are dangerous because they cannot be easily controlled. Status in every era follows those who control perception. It is not enough to be capable. One must appear capable. It is not enough to be disciplined. One must appear composed under pressure. The strategically ruthless man understands that reputation is not built through declarations but through carefully chosen moments of visibility. He speaks rarely, but when he speaks, others listen. He acts sparingly, but when he acts, others remember. There is also the matter of gray areas, those ambiguous spaces where rules become negotiable and outcomes depend on interpretation rather than enforcement. Most men avoid these spaces because they are uncomfortable. They prefer clear instructions, defined boundaries, and moral certainty. Yet, the greatest opportunities often exist precisely where clarity disappears. The man who learns to navigate ambiguity without losing control gains access to possibilities invisible to those who require certainty before acting. Imagine a chessboard in the middle of a long match. The inexperienced player focuses on immediate threats, reacting move by move, defending pieces, hoping to survive. The master studies the entire board, planning several moves ahead, sometimes sacrificing a piece to secure a position that guarantees victory 10 moves later. To the observer, the sacrifice looks like a mistake. Only later does the pattern become clear. Strategic ruthlessness often resembles patience disguised as risk. Another truth reveals itself as a man studies the patterns of influence. The powerful do not always break rules openly. More often, they redefine them quietly. They change standards, shift expectations, and alter incentives until what was once unacceptable becomes normal. The naive protest the change. The strategic adapt to it, sometimes even shaping it. Power is not merely the ability to act. It is the ability to shape the conditions under which others must act. This is why emotional attachment to doing the right thing as defined by others becomes so dangerous. The man who requires universal approval before moving will never move decisively. There will always be critics, always be resistance, always be uncertainty. The strategically ruthless man understands that action creates clarity. Waiting for clarity before acting is often the surest way to remain powerless. Over time, this way of thinking reshapes a man completely. He begins to observe rather than react, to calculate rather than assume, to prepare rather than hope. He understands that most victories are decided long before the final move in quiet moments of planning and positioning that no one else notices. And as this awareness deepens, something changes in the way others perceive him. Conversations become more careful. Challenges become less frequent. Opportunities appear, sometimes without explanation, as if drawn by an invisible gravity. And once a man begins to see these patterns clearly, he also begins to notice something else, something even more uncomfortable. The greatest obstacles to his advancement are rarely external enemies. They are internal restraints, beliefs absorbed in youth that whisper caution at the very moment. Boldness is required. These restraints feel like conscience, like prudence, like wisdom, yet many of them are nothing more than inherited fears disguised as virtue. One of the most powerful of these restraints is the desire to be seen as good in the eyes of everyone. This desire is subtle, and it survives even in men who believe themselves independent. They hesitate before making a decisive move, not because the move is unwise, but because they imagine how it will be judged. They soften their words, dilute their intentions, and postpone their actions, all in pursuit of an approval that rarely brings any real advantage. Meanwhile, those who understand the game act without waiting, and the distance between them grows silently, year by year. Machiavelli observed that men judge more by the eye than by the hand because everyone can see but few can truly perceive. This is why appearing just often matters more than being just, and why appearing decisive often matters more than endless deliberation. The strategically ruthless man understands that perception must be managed with care. He does not reveal every calculation. He does not announce every ambition. He allows others to see only what strengthens his position, and he keeps the rest in shadow. There is also the matter of timing, which separates amateurs from masters. Many men believe success is a matter of effort alone. That persistence will inevitably produce results. Effort is necessary, but timing multiplies or destroys the value of effort. The merchant who invests before a market rises appears brilliant. The one who invests after the rise appears foolish, even if both possessed equal intelligence. Strategic men study cycles, moods, and patterns, waiting for moments when a small move produces a disproportionate effect. Consider a river cutting through stone. It does not attack the mountain directly. It follows the path of least resistance, wearing away obstacles slowly, patiently, until what once seemed immovable collapses under its persistence. Strategic ruthlessness often works in this way. It does not always rely on sudden force. It relies on positioning, patience, and the quiet accumulation of advantage until resistance becomes impossible. Another illusion that traps many men is the belief that reputation is built through constant visibility. They feel compelled to speak, to post, to explain, to justify, believing that presence equals influence. Yet the opposite is often true. Scarcity creates value. The voice that is rarely heard carries more weight than the voice that fills every silence. The man who appears only when necessary becomes associated with importance, while the man who is always present becomes part of the background noise. There is a psychological power in restraint that few understand. When a man refuses to react immediately, others begin to reveal themselves. They speak more than they intended. They expose weaknesses. They betray impatience. Silence is not merely the absence of speech. It is a mirror in which others see themselves more clearly than they expected. And in that reflection, information emerges that no interrogation could produce. Strategic ruthlessness also requires emotional discipline, because anger, pride, and resentment are among the easiest tools for others to manipulate. The man who cannot control his emotions advertises his vulnerabilities openly. A single insult can provoke him. A single challenge can distract him. His opponents need only push the right button. But the man who remains composed becomes unpredictable. He absorbs pressure without revealing where it lands. And this uncertainty forces others into hesitation. There is a moment in every negotiation, every rivalry, every contest when the balance shifts. It is rarely dramatic. It happens quietly when one side realizes the other cannot be easily influenced, cannot be provoked, cannot be rushed. Respect begins to replace dismissal. Caution replaces aggression. And from that moment forward, the dynamics change, often permanently. This is the power shift that defines those who rise. They no longer move according to the expectations of others. They shape expectations instead. They no longer defend every position. They choose which positions matter and abandon the rest without regret. They no longer measure success by approval or applause. They measure it by outcomes, by leverage, by the quiet expansion of their influence. And so the transformation deepens. The man who once sought certainty begins to operate comfortably within ambiguity. The man who once feared being misunderstood begins to accept that misunderstanding is sometimes an advantage. The man who once believed that fairness governed the world begins to see that fairness is often a story told to those who have not yet learned how power truly moves. And as this understanding matures, another realization begins to take shape, one that few men are willing to confront honestly. The majority of people are not competing at the level they believe they are. They are competing within systems designed to keep them occupied, distracted by small victories, chasing recognition that has no real power behind it. They mistake motion for progress, activity for influence, and approval for status. Meanwhile, the men who truly rise are often invisible during the early stages of their ascent, building leverage quietly while others seek attention. One of the defining traits of the strategically ruthless man is his relationship with attention. He understands that attention is a resource, not a reward. Every time he draws it, he does so deliberately with a purpose, and he withdraws it just as carefully. Those who crave constant visibility become predictable, easy to study, easy to counter. Those who appear only at decisive moments create an aura of weight and consequence. Their presence alters the atmosphere of a room, not because they demand it, but because others sense the discipline behind their restraint. Machiavelli observed that men are far more influenced by appearances than by reality, and this insight extends beyond reputation into the realm of status itself. Status is not merely what a man possesses. It is what others believe he possesses. It is the perception of competence, of confidence, of inevitability. The strategically ruthless man cultivates this perception carefully. He does not boast because boasting signals insecurity. He allows results to speak, and when results are not yet visible, he allows silence to create mystery. There is also the matter of alliances, which determine the speed and scale of advancement more than individual effort ever could. Many men build relationships based on familiarity, comfort, or shared history. These connections may provide emotional support, but they rarely produce significant movement. Strategic alliances, on the other hand, are built on shared interests, complementary strengths, and clear expectations. They are not sentimental. They are functional, and because of this, they endure longer and produce greater outcomes. The man who understands this begins to evaluate every relationship through a different lens. He asks not only who he enjoys being around, but who sharpens his thinking, who expands his opportunities, who challenges his assumptions, and who drains his time without adding value. This evaluation is not cruel. It is necessary. Time after 30 becomes too valuable to spend in circles that produce no forward motion. There is a discipline required to operate in this way, a discipline that often feels isolating at first. The strategically ruthless man cannot always explain his decisions because many people interpret calculation as coldness and restraint as indifference. He accepts this misunderstanding as part of the cost of clarity. He understands that being liked by everyone is not only impossible but dangerous, because the desire to please weakens judgment and invites compromise at the worst possible moments. Imagine a craftsman shaping a blade. Each stroke of the file removes a small imperfection, refining the edge until it becomes capable of cutting cleanly and precisely. The process is slow, deliberate, and often invisible to those who do not understand what they are watching. Yet, when the blade is finally complete, its effectiveness appears effortless. Strategic ruthlessness works in much the same way. It is not a single decision, but a series of small, disciplined choices repeated consistently until they reshape a man's entire way of thinking. Another truth becomes evident as this mindset develops. Most men are governed by short-term emotions, by the desire for immediate satisfaction, by the fear of temporary discomfort. They abandon long-term strategies for short-term relief, and in doing so, they trade their future influence for present convenience. The strategically ruthless man reverses this pattern. He accepts discomfort as the price of momentum. He delays gratification not out of virtue but out of calculation, knowing that patience multiplies outcomes in ways impulse never can. Over time, this patience produces a quiet confidence that cannot be imitated. It is not the loud confidence of bravado or the brittle confidence of self-promotion. It is the calm certainty of a man who knows he is positioned well, who understands the terrain, who sees the direction of movement before others notice it. This kind of confidence is difficult to challenge because it is rooted in preparation rather than ego. And so the gap between those who play clean and those who play strategically continues to widen. One group waits for permission, for fairness, for recognition. The other creates circumstances in which permission becomes irrelevant. Fairness becomes negotiable and recognition becomes inevitable. The difference is not talent, it is awareness. It is the willingness to see the world as it is rather than as it was described in youth. And eventually there comes a moment when the transformation is no longer theoretical but real, when a man recognizes that he no longer reacts to the world in the way he once did. Situations that once provoked anxiety now invite analysis. Conflicts that once felt personal now appear strategic. The noise of public opinion, which once felt overwhelming, fades into something distant and irrelevant. What replaces it is clarity, and with clarity comes a quiet, formidable kind of control. The most dangerous shift is not learning how to act ruthlessly, it is learning how to think without illusions. Illusions are comforting, and that is why they are so difficult to abandon. The illusion that fairness governs outcomes. The illusion that effort alone determines success. The illusion that approval is a reliable measure of value. When these illusions fall away, a man begins to see the mechanisms beneath the surface, the incentives, the fears, the silent negotiations that shape every hierarchy. And once seen, these mechanisms cannot be unseen. Machiavelli understood that power is rarely seized in dramatic moments. More often, it accumulates quietly, like water filling a reservoir behind a dam. Each decision, each alliance, each calculated silence adds a small measure of influence until one day the difference becomes undeniable. To the outside observer, the rise appears sudden. To the man who built it, it feels inevitable, the result of countless small moves made with patience and precision. There is also the realization that status is not a destination but a position that must be maintained. Many men rise quickly only to fall just as quickly because they mistake achievement for permanence. The strategically ruthless man never makes this mistake. He understands that influence is fluid, that every position invites rivals, that every success creates expectations. He does not relax into comfort. He reinforces his position constantly, strengthening alliances, refining his skills, and watching carefully for changes in the environment. Consider the image of a fortress standing on a hill. Its walls are thick, its gates reinforced, its defenders disciplined. Yet, the wise commander does not assume the fortress will defend itself forever. He inspects the walls, studies the surrounding terrain, watches the horizon for movement. He prepares not because an attack is certain, but because neglect invites one. Power, like the fortress, survives only when it is maintained with vigilance. Another truth becomes clear as this way of thinking settles into habit. Respect is often born not from kindness but from boundaries. The man who refuses to tolerate disrespect, who protects his time, who declines demands that offer no return, gradually teaches others how to treat him. Those who give endlessly hoping to be appreciated often discover that generosity without limits invites contempt rather than gratitude. Value must be protected to be recognized. There is also the matter of fear, which many misunderstand completely. Fear is not always an enemy in controlled amounts. It sharpens perception and encourages preparation. The strategically ruthless man does not eliminate fear. He studies it. He asks what it reveals, what risk it points toward, what weakness it exposes. And by confronting fear deliberately, rather than avoiding it, he transforms it into awareness and awareness into advantage. As the years pass, this mindset reshapes not only a man's actions but his presence. Others begin to sense a difference that is difficult to describe. He speaks less, but his words carry weight. He moves calmly, but his decisions produce movement around him. He appears unhurried, yet his progress is steady and unmistakable. There is an economy in everything he does, a precision that suggests intention rather than impulse. And so the lesson becomes clear. After 30, playing clean in the naive sense, playing only to appear virtuous, only to be liked, only to avoid discomfort, becomes a slow surrender of influence. The world does not reward harmlessness at the highest levels. It rewards those who understand how power moves, who know when to step forward and when to step back, who can operate within gray areas without losing control of themselves. In the end, the strategically ruthless man is not defined by cruelty, but by clarity. He sees the game as it is, not as he wishes it to be. He accepts that status is earned through positioning, that wealth is built through calculated action, and that influence belongs to those who are willing to act while others hesitate. And like a storm that gathers beyond the horizon, silent and almost invisible until the sky begins to darken, his ascent appears sudden only to those who are not paying attention. If you have made it this far, it is because a part of you already knows this truth. The world does not reward fairness. It rewards awareness. After a certain point in life, the rules become clear. Those who keep playing by appearances stay stuck, while those who understand leverage, timing, and human nature begin to rise quietly and decisively. Now tell me in the comments if you are ready to stop playing the game blindly and start playing it consciously. If this message touched you and made sense, write in the comments, "I see the game." Let us see how many here are truly ready to rise in status instead of remaining trapped in illusion. And do not forget, keep watching the next video. It is important, much more than you imagine.